Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be unpacking a fascinating and honestly highly unconventional philosophical text from 2006 by an author known as D. Form Buddha. It offers this really radical perspective on how we can escape the metaphorical traps of life, stuff like marriage, politics, and religion, to achieve true peace and absolute freedom. Instead of looking at society's structures as helpful foundations, this text asks us to look at them as invisible cages. Whether you end up agreeing with the author's take or not, I guarantee it's going to make you think entirely differently about your daily routine. So let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this. The source material starts by grounding itself in a totally universal human desire. Across pretty much all cultures, everyone yearns for paradise. Whether you call it the Western Pure Land, the Elysium world, or just heaven, the text insists that this perfect, peaceful existence isn't just a myth, it actually exists. But there's a massive roadblock standing right between us and this utopia.
So, that leads us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? If we all want peace, and if paradise is actually out there, why can't we reach it? Well, the text argues that the answer is literally right under our noses. We can't reach it because we are unknowingly stuck. We're completely bogged down by the very lives we've built for ourselves, totally unaware that we're caught in a giant web. So the crucial point is how the author defines our everyday reality. The text introduces this concept of life traps. According to this philosophy, the daily institutions and the societal roles we so eagerly participate in, they aren't stepping stones to a better life. They're metaphorical prisons. They are literal traps that confine our freedom and actively block us from reaching that state of peace we're all looking for. The author warns that if we don't escape these traps, we're simply never going to see paradise.
To make this a bit more concrete, the source categorizes major human institutions into a few distinct traps. First, we have social traps, like marriage, where the consequence is being bound by endless household duties. Then we have geopolitical traps, like nations and military service, which can force you into labor or even deadly wars. And finally, ideological traps, which cover things like religion and politics, where you're bound to repetitive teachings or extreme missions. The overarching warning from the text is incredibly clear. Joining any of these systems means a fundamental loss of your personal autonomy.
Let's look a bit closer at the first one, the marriage trap. Now, this is where the text gets quite provocative. It posits that entering a marriage inherently binds a person to a never-ending cycle of household responsibilities and inevitable interpersonal conflicts. The author makes the specific claim that by avoiding marriage altogether, an individual entirely sidesteps marital conflict and the pain of divorce, ultimately gaining a profound, relative freedom that married folks simply can't access.
Moving over to the ideological side, the author views factions, politics, and religion with equal skepticism. The text argues that joining a political party just forces you into this massive machine of power struggles and conflicts of interest, and if the party makes a mistake, well, you, the individual, end up shouldering the blame. Religion is framed similarly, as a trap where believers have to endure repetitive moral teachings. The text even points out that in the most extreme cases, religious traps might compel followers to carry out incredibly dangerous so-called sacred missions, like strapping a bomb to themselves. In both scenarios, you're surrendering your individual control to the group.
And then there's the geopolitical trap. The source material explains that being a citizen of a nation, or especially being a soldier, ties you directly to the conflicts of that specific nation. Using examples from the time of writing, the author notes that you might be forced to contribute your labor or literally your life to conflicts like the war in Iraq or the Israel-Hezbollah war. Fascinatingly, the author extends this logic to the whole planet, suggesting that even being emotionally tied to Earth itself brings unnecessary anxiety over ecological destruction.
Now, looking at all these harsh consequences, a very natural question pops up. If these institutions are such restrictive prisons, why on earth do humans voluntarily walk right into them every single day? I mean, we aren't being dragged into these situations kicking and screaming, right? For the most part, we're actively choosing them. So why?
And this brilliantly illustrates the author's primary metaphor, comparing humans to fish and these institutions to hunters. It all happens in 3 simple steps. First, the sweetness, which is the bait, is presented. Second, the confused individual, totally tempted by the reward, takes the bait. And third, the trap of life snaps shut, instantly stripping away their freedom.
So what exactly is this sweetness? Well, the source provides a fantastic list of what acts as this fragrant bait. People marry because they're lured by the sweetness of romance. They join political parties for the sweetness of power. They join religions for the sweetness of belonging, and they love their nations for the sweetness of patriotism.
The text even humorously references folklore, asking why the mythical 7 celestial maidens descended to the human world in the first place. The answer? Because of the sweetness. It's the ultimate universal lure.
The reason this trap mechanism works so incredibly well is because of the vast disparity between getting in and getting out. The author uses some really relatable, practical analogies here. Falling into these traps is remarkably easy. It's like starting a climb up a mountain, getting married, or opening a business. But exiting them? That is a whole different story. Climbing back down, navigating a divorce, or trying to close a failing business is fraught with friction, pain, and absolute logistical nightmares.
The text even briefly weaves in a theological element to explain the sheer volume of these traps everywhere, stating that Satan must dig various kinds of traps to ensnare confused individuals. The underlying philosophy here is that not everyone is destined to reach heaven. Some are meant to remain human or animal. So these traps are intentionally placed everywhere in the universe just to catch the unaware and keep them bound to the earthly cycle.
Let's move to the author's proposed solution and see how this builds into cognitive detachment. The source material draws a really stark contrast between being inside the trap versus outside of it. Inside, you experience emotional pain, chaos, and life-threatening danger. But if you can somehow position yourself outside the trap, you become completely detached and peaceful. In fact, the text describes watching all the chaos from the outside as being almost like watching an entertaining movie.
To prove that distance naturally eliminates suffering, the author gives us some pretty visceral examples. When the South Asian tsunami tragically claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, the pain was immense for those affected. But if you were uninvolved or totally unaware halfway across the world, you didn't feel that pain. Similarly, if your neighbors are fighting, it feels like the end of the world to them, but to you, it's just noise. When you view national conflicts from outside the country, the text argues, it's really no different than watching an action scene on television. Your emotional distance protects you. The author actually takes this concept of detachment to an absolute extreme with a personal anecdote about a dream technique called invisibility. Whenever the author senses danger or feels uncomfortable in a dream environment, they mentally disappear. They literally become invisible to people, animals, and even deities' celestial beings. This serves as the ultimate metaphor for what the author is suggesting we do in our waking life. When the environment becomes a trap, you've got to learn to completely mentally detach, effectively making yourself invisible to the drama.
Now, I know exactly what you might be thinking, and the text actually anticipates this exact reaction. The author directly addresses the reader and asks, does this philosophy sound too heartless? Is it unkind and lacking in basic compassion to just detach and watch the world's struggles as if they were a movie?
Well, the author's defense is a pretty blunt reality check about everyday human behavior. The text points out that countless livestock and poultry are slaughtered every single day. Plants and insects die constantly. Human lives are lost daily in hospitals and tragic accidents. Yet despite this constant, overwhelming suffering happening all around us all the time, we continue eating, drinking, and laughing every single day. The author argues that humanity is already passively heartless, so adopting cognitive detachment is simply being honest about the reality of how we naturally process the world. Now, what's really interesting about this next idea is the core logic behind not trying to fix the traps from the inside. The text asks, can a person in prison help fellow inmates escape? The author argues that you cannot change history, you cannot change death, and you certainly cannot alter the evolutionary program of the Tao. Trying to fix the system while you are actively trapped within it is completely futile. So, what's the actual path forward here? Based on the text, the ultimate takeaway is this three-step path to true freedom. First, you have to accept that you just can't change the grand design. Second, you must keep your spirit awake and your heart completely clear. And third, and this is absolutely the most crucial part, you must escape the traps mentally first. Physical escape isn't even strictly necessary if you can achieve total mental awakening. Once your mind is detached, it literally doesn't matter if you're technically inside a marriage, a political party, or a nation. You are free.
It's a seriously challenging, profound framework for looking at how we live our lives, isn't it? We all encounter bait every single day. So, to wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a question drawn straight from the heart of this philosophical text. What sweetness is keeping you trapped today? Take a moment, look at your own life, and see if you can spot the traps. Thank you so much for joining us to explore these ideas. Until next time, keep your spirit awake and stay curious.